Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York here in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's special event is entitled Flight or Fight, Artists in Nazi Germany 1933 to 1945, featuring Rachel Stern, the founding director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art. And she'll discuss the system of fear and control installed by the Nazis, its impact on the national cultural landscape, and artists' strategy for survival. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: genocide and mass atrocities. And these horrors continue to have devastating political, social, psychological, economic, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. Our event today is part of the 2025-26 KHC and National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium entitled Resistance, Resilience, and Reinvention, Artists and Academics Escaping Nazism. And it's co-sponsored by 9 organizations around the country, and they include the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in White Plains, the Center for Genocide and Human Rights Research in Africa and the Diaspora at Northeastern Illinois University, the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan University, the Ray Walpole Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University, the Reef Center for Human Rights and Conflict Resolution at Christopher Newport University, the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention at Binghamton University, the Cohen Institute for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College, and the Martin Springer Institute at Northern Arizona University. I'd like to thank our colleagues from the Media Services and Digital Transformation departments, including Phil Roncaroni and Jesse Pina, as well as Barana Soman, the KHC's Museum Coordinator, for all their help in producing today's event. And before we begin, a reminder for you here in the center, if you could please turn off your cell phones. And after the presentation, we'll host a brief Q&A. For those of you here, we'll hand a microphone, which you'll need to speak into so we can make sure that it's included in the recording. And for those of you watching online, please drop your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce one of this year's KHC NEH Faculty Fellows, Dr. Mark Zeltzer. Dr. Zeltzer is Assistant Professor of Philosophy in the Social Sciences Department here at Queensborough. His research is on the philosophy of mathematics, ancient political philosophy, Jewish philosophy, and military ethics, and he was one of the critical people involved in the restoration of the KHC signature artifact, a fragment of a Torah scroll that was saved from Czestochowa, Poland. So, Dr. Zeltzer, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Zeltzer. I'm Assistant Professor of Philosophy here at Queensborough Community College. I'd like to begin by thanking and welcoming everybody who made this event possible. First, Dr. Laura Cohen and Barana Soman, who really put this all together. My colleagues, Dr. Allison Cimino and Beth Cunahan, who are the current NEH Fellows and wonderful co-organizers of this lecture series as well. And thanks also to the staff who make all the technical magic happen here. We could not have done this without you. Thank you. Welcome also to our in-person attendees, as well as those of you who are watching this live online, and those of you who are viewing this at a later date. Finally, as we say in Hebrew, acharon acharon chaviv, saving the best for last, welcome Rachel Stern, the founding director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art in New York. The theme of this year's NEH Colloquium is Resistance, Resilience, and Reinvention, Artists and Academics Escaping Nazism. In 1933, as Hitler tightened his grip on Germany, thousands of Jewish and dissident artists and academics found themselves targeted, not only by Nazi anti-Semitism, but also by the regime's sweeping control over culture and everyday life. As Nazism spread, many painters, writers, filmmakers, and scholars tried to find safety elsewhere in Europe or in the United States, though strict and often anti-Semitic immigration rules frequently stopped them. This series looks at their stories, contributions, and lasting influence of those who managed to flee, while supported by various networks and individuals. We're doing this through a mix of lectures, poetry readings, and faculty development programs each semester. The series, we hope, also shines light on the acts of resistance and the creative work that grew out of their tenacious struggle to survive. It's my hope that these lectures act to remember them and their struggle, and to remind us of those whose efforts were not successful and who perished in Europe during the Holocaust. Rachel Stern is the founding director and chief executive officer of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art in New York City. Born and educated in Germany, she studied art history and economics at the Georg August University Göttingen. After emigrating to the United States in 1994, she contributed to the emigre newspaper Aufbau and spent a decade working in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Museum of Art in New York City. Ms. Stern has independently organized many exhibitions and written widely on modern and contemporary art. In 2002, she received a grant from the NEA, and in 2017, she was awarded the Hans and Leah Grundig Prize for her pioneering research on the German Jewish expressionist Fritz Ascher. Her work included the International Traveling Exhibition and the book To Live is to Blaze with Passion, the expressionist Fritz Ascher. Her more recent accomplishments include publishing Fritz Ascher, Poetry Album 357, and co-editing with Jutta Gottsman the exhibition catalog Love and Betrayal, the expressionist Fritz Ascher from New York Private Collections. Ms. Stern serves on the board of the Fritz Ascher Stiftung at the Stadtmuseum Berlin and the Jewish Art Salon, and is a member of the Aktivis Museum Berlin. Her ongoing work ensures that artists silenced by persecution continue to be recognized, studied, and remembered. Ms. Stern is a particularly appropriate person for our theme this year, and I'm so glad she was able to join us here today. Please join me in welcoming her. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura and Mark, for your kind introduction and for the invitation to speak here. I'm grateful to all who made this talk possible here at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center and beyond. Good afternoon, everyone. On July 18, 1937, Adolf Hitler announced, and I quote, "During the long years of planning for the new Reich and thus for its intellectual creation and shaping, I often devoted myself to the tasks that the rebirth of the nation would impose on us, especially in the area of its cultural purification. After all, Germany was to arise again, not only politically or economically, but above all, also culturally. Indeed, I was and am convinced that this last aspect will take on much greater importance for the future than the first two. Art is in no way fashion. In the same way that little changes in the nature and blood of our people, art too must lose its character of transience. Instead, in its continuously intensifying creations, it must be a worthy visual expression of the life's course of our people. From now on, we will wage a relentless war of purification against the last elements of our cultural decay." End of quote. Following his programmatic speech on National Socialist cultural policy, Hitler celebrated the opening of the Große Deutsche Kunstausstellung, Great German Art Exhibition, at the newly built Haus der Deutschen Kunst, House of German Art, in Munich. It was the first of 8 annual exhibitions that aimed to define and illustrate Hitler's concept of German art. On display were some 900 works, nudes and genre paintings, still lifes, idealized landscapes, mythological scenes, images of workers and heroes, and above all, portraits of so-called pure and Aryan people. The following day, the Entartete Kunst, Degenerate Art exhibition opened nearby. It was a collection of more than 650 paintings, sculptures and prints by 112 artists that were seen as not complying with Nazi ideology. Most represented the modern movements that defined 20th century art, like Cubism, Dadaism, Futurism, or Expressionism, and all were confiscated from German state-owned museums. In the exhibition, many works were displayed without frames and partially covered by derogatory slogans. It traveled in various iterations to a total of 13 German and Austrian cities between 1937 and 1941, before its paintings were destroyed or sold, along with more than 21,000 other objects purchased from museums. These two exhibitions marked a new stage in the cultural policies which the German National Socialist regime had promoted from the onset. The ceremonial cornerstone laying for the House of German Art on October 15, 1933, had been one of the first official acts of the new Nazi regime in Munich. But why did Hitler choose the new construction of a Munich art exhibition palace for the Third Reich as its first great task? Why was culture so important? Kultur, in his publication über den Prozess der Zivilisation, The Civilizing Process from 1939, the sociologist Norbert Elias explored the German distinction between Zivilisation und Kultur. Often presented as opposing categories, this understanding reflects a stark contrast to our understanding here in the United States, the more intertwined use of civilization in French and or English. Kultur was associated with the deeper, more profound aspects of human existence, with spiritual, intellectual, and artistic phenomena. It had a positive, value-laden connotation, representing inner worth, individual self-cultification, and a pre-reflective, historically inherited national character. It was based on a backward look on tradition. According to Elias, the German language does not have a name for what the English and French-speaking world calls civilization. Here, civilization is a long-term trend of increasing control over basic human behavior, manners and emotions as societies develop. This process is driven by the state's monopoly on violence, but also by a corresponding rise in internal psychological control. The development of civilizations has strongly to do with monotheism, authority, and the installation of something like conscience, out of which we develop rules. It provides a social environment, a high-trust society that makes the free development of art, philosophy, science, and technology possible. In German thought, Zivilisation was often used in a negative sense, referring to the more superficial external aspects of society. It described matters of mere good manners, etiquette, forms of social interaction, technology, and the organized social political structures like the state or bureaucracy. Zivilisation was seen as potentially threatening to genuine national Kultur. This unique German understanding of Kultur presents a look at past achievements of the German people, which they have without doing anything for it. With that understanding, it makes sense that the House of German Art was so important for Hitler. During the cornerstone laying ceremony, he declared the foundation of not just a new building, but a new era of generally German art. He had been elected Reichskanzler, Chancellor of the Reich, on January 30th, 1933. Immediately after the Reichsermächtigungsgesetz, the Enabling Act, was signed by Reichspräsident von Hindenburg in March of 1933, Hitler and the NSDAP assumed absolute power. During the following month, Germany became a full-fledged dictatorship, with SA, Gestapo, and the newly created SS ruling the streets, fiercely persecuting, torturing, and killing the opponents of the regime, using lists that had been prepared long before. The artist George Grosz had left the country just before. He and his family left for New York on January 12, 1933. A prominent member of Berlin Dada and New Objectivity, and a short-time member of the Communist Party, he was known for his satires criticizing the social and political conditions of the era. Friends, had warned him that he would be visited as soon as the Nazis were in power. In Interrogation from 1938, Gross references the murder of his friend, the writer and anarchist Erich Mühsam. An inscription beneath this image in Berlin dialect reads, "And can't you dance something entertaining for us, comrade? You learned this so beautifully in Moscow, indeed," referring satirically to Mühsam's communism. The German-American philosopher Hannah Arendt later observed that Gross' work seemed to us not satires, but realistic reportage. We knew those types. They were all around us. In the mid to late 1940s, Gross created the Stickman, his last large series of paintings and works on paper, which show emaciated, skeletal, hollow, and transparent beings, often referred to by numbers rather than names. They appear to represent humanity stripped of its identity and spirit in a post-apocalyptic world. Far from becoming apolitical during his time in the United States, Gross created works that serve as a stark warning against fascism, collectivism, and global conflict. In May 1933, soon after the dissolution of all opposing parties, some 50,000 books by Jews and other so-called traitors and degenerates were burned in Berlin and in every other German university town. On September 22, 1933, the Reichskulturkammer, Reich Chamber of Culture, was established, the central institution for controlling any form of cultural work in the National Socialist state. As a governmental body, it was under direct control of Joseph Goebbels' Reichsministerium für Volksaufklärung und Propaganda, the Ministry for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. It was divided into 7 lower chambers for the 7 fields of art: theater, fine arts, music, literature, radio, film, and the press. For artists, the Reichskammer der Bildenden Künste, Chamber of Fine Arts, was responsible. On the organizational chart, it looks like a professional organization supporting the arts, but its real purpose was to register and monitor all individuals creating culture in Nazi Germany. Membership was required by law. Only artists who were members of the chambers could practice their profession publicly. For visual artists, that included exhibiting their works and selling through galleries and auction houses. Only members of the chamber were allowed to publicly obtain artistic materials. To be accepted as a member, one had to fill out a 2-page form, which, in addition to biographical data, also required information on education, party membership, and family situation. The artists also had to submit works of art, or at least photographs of them. But more importantly, the applicant had to prove Aryan descent, which meant no non-Aryan ancestors for at least the past 3 generations. But most members were not accepted via this official route, but instead as a result of the enforced conformity of professional associations, which were dissolved in 1933 and their membership transferred to the Reichskammer der Bildenden Künste. This process was the latest concluded in 1936 with the disbanding of the Deutscher Künstlerbund, German Artists Association, which brought thousands of new members to the chamber. With this, a comprehensive registry of cultural life was created in a short period of time. But all new members had to be vetted afterwards, and supporting documents had to be requested. This process explains why some Jewish artists were members of the chamber during the first years and only thrown out once they could not prove Aryan descent. When examining individual career paths, it becomes evident that the extent of defamation varied widely and depended on many factors. artists were marginalized for quite a variety of reasons, which often did not have anything to do with the art they created, but were instead related to their religion, background, sexual orientation, or political affiliation. Furthermore, circumstances such as name recognition, national and international networks, and gender also affected the scopes of action that were open to artists in National Socialist Germany. The state chamber offices also applied political directives inconsistently. Although the literature often refers to bans on painting, exhibiting, or practicing one's profession, such comprehensive prohibitions actually affected only a very small number of artists. In most cases, the chamber's restrictions applied only to the public practice of the profession. While the actual marginalization of artists during the Nazi regime must be considered on a case-to-case basis, more general statements can be made about the fate of the Jewish artists. In general, Jews were targeted from the beginning. Anti-Jewish laws were enacted, Jewish-owned shops were boycotted, Jews were expelled from government positions, schools, research institutes and universities. They were banned from practicing law and excluded from all national societies. Kurt Singer, himself dismissed from his position as a general manager of the Berlin Municipal Opera because he was Jewish, helped initiate the founding of the Jüdischer Kulturbund, Jewish Cultural Association. The organization created employment opportunities for Jewish artists and provided the Jewish community with access to cultural events such as plays, concerts, operas, and lectures, at a time when they were barred from participating in mainstream German cultural life. Its activities were limited to Jewish audiences and were tightly monitored and censored by the Nazi regime, especially by Hans Hinkel of the Reich Ministry of Propaganda. Under Singer's leadership, the Kulturbund expanded to include branches in many German cities. On September 11, 1941, the Gestapo ordered the closure of the Kulturbund. After exclusion from public cultural life in 1933, the Jewish artist Maria Luiko, who was born in Munich 1904 and died in Auschwitz 1941, born Marie-Louise Kohn in Munich, made her studio available for exhibitions and theater rehearsals. Known for her drawings, watercolors and oil paintings, as well as silhouettes, lithographs, woodcuts and linocuts, she now contributed to the Munich branch of the Jewish Cultural Association and to the Marionette Theater of Munich Jewish artists. A large part of her graphic works, in which she critically deals with the current living conditions and everyday situations, were created during this time. On November 20, 1941, Maria Luiko was deported to Kaunas in Lithuania and was murdered there. On September 15, 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were announced, consisting of the Reichsbürgergesetz, Reich Citizenship Law, and the Gesetz zum Schutze des deutschen Blutes und der deutschen Ehre, the law for the protection of German blood and German honor. These laws defined German citizenship exclusively by racial criteria, restricting full Reich citizenship to individuals of so-called German or kindred blood. The Reich Citizenship Law established a hierarchy of citizenship based on ancestry, excluding Jews from the protective community of the Reich, while the accompanying blood law prohibited marriages, extramarital relations, and even employment in Jewish households if involving those of German blood, under penalties including imprisonment. A first implementing regulation on November 14, 1935, precisely categorized individuals: full Jews as those with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents, half Jews with 2, and those with 1 as racially mixed, affecting citizenship status and leading to the denaturalization of approximately 2.7 million people deemed non-Aryan by 1939. These laws represented a pivotal shift toward total exclusion of Jews. Now, membership in the Chamber of Fine Arts required proof of non-Aryan ancestors for the spouse as well. In 1938, the artist Karl Hofer lost his membership in the chamber because his wife, Mathilde Hofer, was Jewish. Once he divorced her, he regained his membership. Mathilde Hofer was deported to Auschwitz in 1942 and murdered there. The politically committed anti-fascist artist Hans Grundig did not divorce his Jewish wife, Leah Grundig. They had met at the Dresden Academy of Art, joined the German Communist Party in 1926, and co-founded ASSO, the Association of Revolutionary Visual Artists. Both documented Nazi brutality in their art and were imprisoned multiple times. Leah Grundig describes in Gesichte from 1961, and I quote, "After 1933, things changed. One had to portray the madness that spread stupidity and delusion, preached hatred, and prepared the ground for the most horrific mass murder to date, and the strength that persisted despite the Gestapo." End of quote. Leah Grundig's Whispering from 1935 depicts what Hans Grundig describes in his autobiography Carnival from 1962, and I quote, "I surely don't need to tell you that we had to be extremely careful, because everywhere there were informers and spies just waiting to hand someone over to the Gestapo." End of quote. Both were arrested and incarcerated in 1938 for suspicion of subversive activity due to their ongoing artistic and political resistance. Leah was released from Dresden prison in December 1939 on the condition of emigration and fled to Palestine. Hans was sent to the concentration camp Sachsenhausen in 1940. Both reunited in Dresden in 1949 and took an active part in visualizing the ideology of Eastern Germany, the German Democratic Republic. During the night of November 9 to 10, 1938, German Nazi leaders unleashed a nationwide violent anti-Jewish riot, which came to be called Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass. Synagogues were burned, Jewish-owned businesses and homes were vandalized, and about 26,000 Jewish men were imprisoned in concentration camps. Charlotte Salomon depicts this night in Berlin. Soon after, she flees to the south of France to live with her grandparents. There, between 1940 and 1942, in a burst of intense creative energy, she produced her life's work, the monumental autobiographical series titled Life or Theater, a Song Play, Leben oder Theater, ein Singspiel. In 769 gouaches, she recounts her life story in fictionalized form, from her childhood in Berlin to her life as a refugee. She was murdered in Auschwitz at the age of 26 while 5 months pregnant, but her work was hidden and survived the Holocaust. Berlin artist Fritz Ascher was arrested during Kristallnacht and interned at the concentration camp Sachsenhausen, later the Gestapo prison Potsdam. In sketches and drawings, he had depicted the increasing political and social polarization within German society. After he returned from fighting in World War I, the Dionysian seemed to be omnipresent in Ascher's work. His people are on the run. Starting 1933, that was his fate as well. He was not allowed to leave the country like Leah Grundig. Instead, he was released under strict reporting requirements. From November 1941, like all Jews, he had to wear the yellow star. By that time, the decision to exterminate the Jews had already been made at the highest levels of the Nazi regime, But the Wannsee Conference, held on January 20th, 1942 in a Berlin suburb, was essential for organizing the logistics and bureaucracy of the mass murder on a continent-wide scale. Ascher was warned to go into hiding. From June 1942, his mother's friend Martha Grassmann hid him first in her apartment and later in the basement of Lassenstraße 26 in the upscale Berlin-Grunewald neighborhood. Hunger, immobility, and loneliness, as well as the constant fear of betrayal, discovery, and death, characterized these years. He wrote poems, which read like a reflection of his feelings and inner states of mind. Ratte, dunkel bleibt's und schleicht in Huschen. Unrat scheint dem Geist gemein. Tückisch wie die Augen funkeln, Menetekel des Versumpften, des verfemten Flüchtigsein. He also turned to a new theme. Many poems invoke nature as a place of refuge and spiritual home. After the capitalization of Germany in 1945, Fritz Ascher was one of about 5,000 Jews who had survived submerged in Germany. About 1,700 of them survived in Berlin. He moved in with Martha Grassmann, just a short walk from his former hiding place. She looked after him for the rest of his life. Like most other Jews in post-war Germany, he lived largely withdrawn from society. Instead of human beings, he now depicted nature. Staying true to his expressionist sensibility, the artist created powerful images of suns, flowers, and trees, with bright colors and intense brushstrokes. He worked with new immediacy and urgency, dramatically simplifying forms and means. Trees and flowers often filled the entire picture plane. Alone or in groups, those trees stand like monuments in their landscape. They become standing figures that confront us, each as distinctive as each individual. I conclude this talk with two artists who were able to flee Europe and fought the Nazis with their art from the United States, Lily René and Arthur Szyk. In 1953, Lily René painted herself at home in Vienna, holding a doll surrounded by art and books. Her sheltered childhood with drawing lessons, opera and ballet performances ended forever when Austria was annexed by the Nazis on March 12, 1938, and experienced its very own Kristallnacht. Her gouache, Longing for an Island Life, from January 1939, depicts the teenager's dream of being somewhere peaceful, however small, where hate and racial differences do not exist. 3 months later, the 17-year-old was among the roughly 10,000 children whose lives were saved when they left Austria for England on the Kindertransport. She later joined her parents, who had managed to flee to America, arriving in New York on January 30th, 1940. In New York, Lily responded to an ad looking for experienced illustrators at Fiction House, an established publisher of comic books. In the middle of a boom in the American comic book industry, they were hiring women to replace the male artists who had been drafted into the armed forces. Fiction House comic books were unusual in that they often featured female heroes, beautiful girl detectives and spies who didn't need men to save them. This gave Lily the opportunity to draw and later invent dashing and daring female characters. By far, her most famous character was Señorita Rio, a daring, sexy, and glamorous female spy, secret agent, and, as a cover, a Hollywood starlet and dancer. She remembered later, quote, "I loved fighting the Germans, even if it was just on paper." Polish-born Arthur Szyk fought the Nazi regime on paper as well. He was already internationally known in the 1920s and 30s for his honored illuminations and book illustrations of historical subjects and Jewish themes. When he created what would become known as the Szyk Haggadah, Jewish religious text about the exodus from Egypt. He created the artwork between 1934 and 1936 in Lodz, Poland, and moved to London in 1937 to supervise the publication, which was eventually released in late 1940 by the Beaconsfield Press. In his illustrations, like the four sons shown here, Schick embedded a bold anti-Nazi message, drawing a parallel between the ancient story of the exodus from Egypt and the contemporary persecution of Jews in Nazi Germany. On the top left, we see the wicked son with Hitler-like mustache, monocle and cigar, a Bavarian hat with feather and a riding crop tucked under his arm. In 1940, it is likely that the Polish and British governments helped arrange Schick's departure from England to Canada and then to the United States. Traveling on the same ship were several prominent European intellectuals, all equally staunch opponents of the Nazis, who hoped to contribute to the Allied war effort by alerting Americans to the growing danger. Schick's warnings about the threat Nazism posed to the United States reached a wider audience the following year when Putnam published The New Order, a collection of his sharp anti-Nazi caricatures and satires in the summer of 1941. Schick worked at a feverish pace, and his images graced the covers and inside pages of leading magazines. Millions of Americans saw his work, even if they could not pronounce his name. Schick was not only a leading anti-fascist political caricaturist, but also a strong advocate for Jewish rescue. He devoted a great deal of time and energy to the Emergency Committee to Save the Jewish People of Europe, and pushed for the establishment of an independent Jewish state in Palestine. He used his 1942 drawings of Roosevelt's Four Freedoms to reach a larger non-Jewish audience and drum up financial support for the Emergency Committee to Save the Jews of Europe. In recycling these images, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, Schick intentionally linked Jewish rescue to the foundations of American democracy. Helping to save Jewish lives from destruction at Nazi hands was portrayed as a truly American goal. In 1943, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt publicly lauded his efforts. The Ballad of the Doomed Jews of Europe, published in March 1943, is a forceful protest poem by screenwriter Ben Hecht, illustrated by Arthur Schick, that it denounces Western indifference to the Holocaust. The piece functioned as a sharp call to action and gained wide visibility when it appeared as a full-page advertisement in the New York Times in September 1943, sponsored by the Bergson Group, a Zionist activist organization. 4 million Jews waiting for death. Oh, hang and burn, but quiet, Jews. Don't be bothersome, save your breath. The world is busy with other news. 4 million murders are quite a smear. Even our State Department views the slaughter with much disfavor here. But then, it's busy with other news. You'll hang like a forest of broken trees. You'll burn in 1,000 Nazi stews. And tell your God to forgive us, please, for we were busy with other news. Tell him we hadn't quite the time to stop the killing of all the Jews. Tell him we looked askance at the crime, but we were busy with other news. O world, be patient. It will take some time before the murder coups are done. By Christmas, you can make your peace on earth without the Jews. The artistic responses to the cultural policies of the German Nazi regime were as diverse as the individuals creating them. In our online exhibition, Identity, Art and Migration, you can take a deeper dive into the experience of 8 Jewish European artists who were forced to abandon their country of origin or remain in hiding for years in response to Nazi policies in effect from 1933 to 1945. Find out in more detail how the experiences of Annie Albers, Friedel Zubers, Eva Hesse, Rudi Lesser, Lili René, Samson Chamis, Arthur Schick, and Fritz Ascher affected their sense of who they were and the art they made. The exhibitions, publications, and programs of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art examine how the German Nazi regime reshaped the cultural landscape, restricting artistic expression, silencing creators, and endangering lives. By studying these histories, we aim to celebrate the art and commemorate those who created it, and get a better understanding of the resilience, vulnerability, and power of creative practice in time of political oppression. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We are going to take a 1-minute break and set up for the Q&A.
Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much. Make sure all of our mics are on.
Mine should be still on.
Yep. Mark, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. That was great. I learned so much. I had some questions. So one question I had was, you were talking about Arthur Schick, and you showed his depiction of the 4 sons from the Passover Haggadah. But when we looked at most of the other artists, the artists produced art. Was there much Jewish art produced by the Jewish artists, or was it largely art? If I can make that distinction.
I think you find the whole spectrum, really, because, art is the personal expression of who somebody is. And German Jews were highly assimilated. So I think you would find less Jewish art there, at least before the experience of persecution. That changed for some of them afterwards, because some got interested why they were persecuted and what this whole thing was about, being Jewish and what it meant, and took a deep dive into that. But Arthur Schick was already an established artist who did reference Jewish themes and Jewish holidays on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Also to mention, Arthur Schick, there is a new exhibition at the Museum of Jewish Heritage that's opening on December 7th. So for those of you that are here at the center, that's something you might want to check out.
Right.
Rachel, I have a question. So I was actually fascinated by the slide of the Nazi cultural organization that vetted people. And each night I go to sleep and I'm watching the TikTok, which is never really good for my mental health. And last night I was reminded that there's a lot of conversation about our data being stolen, but there's also a surveillance state that exists all around us right now. New York City police, and whenever you're walking on the street, and with Ring cameras, all of our identities are out there and they can find us. And so I'm curious, with this surveillance state and the fact that we have deportations by masked people happening, what are some lessons that we can take from the artists of the period as we look at this very concerning and kind of terrifying culture that we live in right now?
I think courage is the biggest thing, and the realization that America is not Nazi Germany. It is a very different country that has a very different dynamic than Europe has. And but I think at the same time, it's important to speak up and be active. If there are things happening that you don't like, everyone can do something about it and can make a difference.
I take a lot of great comfort in that. I think that it sometimes seems obvious, but it's not, because as the fear kind of settles in, especially into our bodies and our nervous system, sometimes that's not really obvious. We have one question that's come in online, and the question is, can you discuss your thoughts on the distinction between art and propaganda in general? Where's the line, and where does art become propaganda itself?
I personally, I think art is art. And if it has the what is happening in society as a theme, it still has to be art first. Propaganda is something very different. Like that's not necessarily art. Mm-hmm. But talking about Schick, he had the opinion and said so that art is propaganda. So I disagree with that, but you know, it's both out there as opinions.
Do we have any questions in the room?
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I'm Kathy Wendrick. I'm the chair of the Art and Design Department here at Queensborough. I also teach a history of graphic design, so I'm very excited to share the Arthur Schick's work and Lily Renee's work with my students, many of whom are interested in things like comic books. So I'm very excited. I'm going to ask them to go to the Arthur Schick Museum as well, our exhibition at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. So I'm very excited. I had also never seen the work of Lily Grundig before.
Lea Grundig? Lily Renee?
Sorry, Leah
Grundig.
Leah Grundig before.
Yeah.
And I don't know very much about her career. Do you have anything else that you can share with us about?
There are many things that are not known about her, still many details. She grew up in an Orthodox Jewish house and wanted to be an artist. So she went to the Dresden Academy and met Hans Grundig, who was a little bit older, and they both were interested in communism and became very active as communists and used their art to speak up really for the workers' plights, for unemployed, for women, for social injustices and or against social injustices. And when the Nazis came to power, they said, and I read that quote, that now you can't. The social imbalances are not our first concern anymore. Now the Nazis are. And so she was a Jew and a communist. As a Jew, she could have already have been killed, but she was offered actually, and they were both were arrested multiple times because they kept producing anti-Nazi art. And interesting enough, also, they traveled to Switzerland quite often and always came back. Decided to come back to Germany because they felt our work here is so important. We have to influence the German public we have to help stop this. And they came back again and again and again and were arrested again and again and again. But early enough for Leah Grundig to be able to leave the country to Palestine, where she built a life, where she had an artistic career. And Hans Grundig actually came to was brought to the concentration camp Sachsenhausen. Sachsenhausen was one of the camps, was one of the very early camps that was opened, and the first people who were before Kristallnacht even interned there were communists. And the communists, other than the Jews, unfortunately, were very well organized. So they placed people in the kitchen, in different parts of the camp, and they took care of each other. They exchanged information. So they set up a system that helped them survive the camp. There's an interesting biography by Naujoks, just forgetting the first name, who was in Sachsenhausen basically from the first day it opened to the last day of the war. And he describes all these really at detail. And he said how helpless the Jews were who came, and how badly organized they were among each other, because they came from different countries, from different communities. So Hans Grundig, I believe, survived the concentration camp because of that communist network that he was part of. And then they still believed in the communist ideology, and Hans Grundig went to Eastern Germany after the wall was built and the country was separated, and he talked Lea Grundig into coming back to the east, even though the borders were closed and it was not easy for her to get into the country. And then they became, especially her, became very important in forming the ideology and handing down, teaching the ideology of communism. Socialism really wasn't really communism that was built up there, and so she became a very, very strong part of that, and was criticized for that quite a lot. So, yeah,
Thank you.
It's an interesting life.
Thank you so much.
We have another question online. How did the Renee and Schick families manage to gain entry to the U.S. during a time when the country was hesitant to accept refugees? Another very salient moment for us here. Was it because of their extraordinary artistic ability or another reason?
I think different reasons for each of them. Lily Renee was able to get out with a Kindertransport to London. Her parents tried to get out of the country as soon as possible, as soon as the country was annexed. And at that time, the quotas for Austria were still quite high in the United States. For Germany, they were already very low. You couldn't get into the United States from Germany at that point, and definitely not from Poland. So that's how and then the families were reunited, because most children who got out on a Kindertransport never saw their parents or any family member again. The case was different for Arthur Schick, because he was in London in 1937, and the circumstances are still a little unknown, but he was sent on a ship over to Canada to go to the US to influence and inform the public with their artwork, with his artwork, about what was happening in Nazi Germany, and what the danger for the United States would be from the Nazi ideology, because there was a part of the Nazi Party that was trying to overtake the United States as well. And so he was supposed to, with these other intellectuals, to find ears of the American people. And actually, the interesting thing is that the American soldier, it's being said that the American soldiers who went to Germany, to Europe to fight the Nazis, more of them had a drawing by Arthur Szyk in their knapsack than pornographic images, which I hear is the usual thing. I wouldn't know, but so that was interesting. They took his drawings and his images with them to fight the Nazis.
Do we have a question in the audience here?
Yeah, if you had to pick one country that helped, the survivors or to take them in, which country in the world helped the artists' safety?
The survivors.
Yeah, survivors. Which country?
So post-45, you're saying? Yeah.
If you had to pick one country, which country would you say? European country or any other country that helped the survivor people leave and take them in?
I mean, the South American states took in the whole time. They were open, not only to Nazis, they were also open to refugees and survivors, right? So, but also the U.S. opened their gates again once the war was over. Sweden was amazing. Yes, the Danes were amazing during the war, and also post-war. Actually, they never ratted out a single Jew, and actually the people kept the apartments of the Jews and watered the plants. I'm sure not all of them, but neighbors took care of the apartments of the Jews waiting for their return, because most of the Danish Jews were brought to Sweden in this overnight boating, where boats were sent from Denmark, where the Danish king could not protect the Danish Jews anymore from the Nazi invasion. And in an overnight action, all fishers got their boats out and rowed the Jews over to Sweden to safety. And they stayed there for the rest of the war. And then the Danish Jews could return as soon as the war was over. So, so there were a few countries that were quite amazing, but not enough. Too little. Most of the countries too late. Yeah.
I have another, there's a few questions coming in online, and we have a colleague who is joining us from Uganda. So I want to again bring the conversation to the present and think about another group of people who are under siege. So I'm going to read this. Artists under the Nazi regime were persecuted and controlled because their work challenged an oppressive ideological system, yet many continue to resist through creative strategies of survival. Today in Uganda, advocates for refugee male survivors and sexual and gendered minorities face persecution and silencing under heteronormative structures and laws, such as the 2023 Anti-Homosexuality Act. What can contemporary artists and advocates learn from survival strategies of those persecuted artists to challenge these modern systems of fear and exclusion and to bring visibility to survivors whose experiences are forcibly erased? I know it's pretty key, but I just think it's important to also kind of talk about this, because I think in the United States right now, we are very focused on what's happening to our individual communities as either our religious communities or our ethnic communities. And I think it's very important for us to also think about and be in solidarity with other communities around the world who might be experiencing similar kinds of hardship and erasure.
So one thing I have to correct, in Nazi Germany, there was not much resistance. It's really, a handful of people who resisted, and resisted by hiding people, by and you know, they didn't even necessarily risk their own lives. So I think this post-war attempt to make us think that this was a country of resistors, and there was just this evil leadership that told them to do all those mean things. It's just really not true. It's a myth, and I do think even then it depends a little bit on the definition of resistance. If you know, a Nazi said walk straight and you just walk to the side, that's resistant. Or if you, you know, there are artists who stop producing art not to be part of while living in Germany, is that resistance? Like, it's a question of really how you define resistance. But both acts that would endanger people's lives were very rare in Germany. I don't know, I'm hesitant to compare the Holocaust to anything else, because I am a strong believer that it is quite singular in its scope, and the industrial way, the extermination of the Jews and other unwanted people was facilitated. But I do think, I mean, for present life, we don't have a dictatorship here in the US. We live in a democracy. We can all speak our mind, and if something is happening that you don't agree with, be active, you know, say something, do something. There's no danger other than maybe social media onslaught if you do that in that space, on that platform. But our lives are not really necessarily endangered just because we speak our mind. And we definitely should not be afraid. This is not, no, we shouldn't be.
I appreciate your saying that. I'm not there by any means, but we're definitely trying to be brave. We have a few more questions, and there are a few now that are talking about specific artists. So I'm going to try to bundle these a little bit.
Okay.
So someone's asked if you could talk about the interaction between artists and authors like Irmgard Kohn in resisting the Nazis. Another is how did Kath Kollwitz, how did she manage to survive under the Nazi regime? And then also, if you could talk a little, we'll leave it there for those two right now.
Kath Kollwitz died in 1945. She, I'm not quite sure. Her plight was really the workers, the unemployed, the women. She lost her son in World War I and depicted that. So she was of the earlier generation and was not seen as a danger per se. I'm not sure whether she was in the Degenerate Art exhibition, possibly, but her the art she created was not expressionistic, and it didn't really question necessarily I'm not sure. Yeah. Sorry.
I have a sort of bigger question. I mean, this is probably sort of well known, but not by me. So we saw examples of a nice diverse range of art. You began the talking about the exhibit that the Nazis put on of like, it seemed to me like they were saying, hey, this is your last look at stuff we want you to never produce. Take a good look at it, never do that. Presumably they had a lot of Jewish artists who were in the mix, but presumably I assume they also had a lot of art that, because of the nature of the art and not the artist, was somehow unwholesome, undesirable, degenerate. What were they trying to do? What was the relationship between undesirable art and the undesirable person that they were trying to discourage? In other words, like, what made undesirable art undesirable, or what made degenerate art degenerate? And how did that play into their theory of what we want the good German to be like? Is that a big question?
Yeah. So it is a very interesting question, actually, because there was a cultural war going on, which should be the official German art. Now, Emil Nolde, who was at that time the most well-known German painter, and became after 45 as well. He was an expressionist who really wanted to be the painter of the Nazi regime. He loved their ideology, tried to sign on as a member right in the beginning, was a big believer in the ideology. And in the end, he didn't manage to become that, because Hitler, who had also wanted to study art, saw himself as a bit of an artist himself, was very traditional. So there was a big discussion within the party, and until Hitler said, no, this is the art, we want traditional art that shows, the Aryan type, that shows the values that we stand for, and so on. I mean, the traditional art, and then they showed these nudes that became known as the Nazi art. Arnold Breker created these huge sculptures of the Aryan man, but it very much referred to the Greek sculptures, the Greek idol of, the idea of beauty of the body. So it was basically a political decision by Hitler, which would be the art that the state, that the Nazi regime signs on to. And the interesting thing is that the German art exhibition had very few visitors. But the degenerate art exhibition had a lot of visitors. They had more than 2 million visitors, 20,000 a day. People were standing around the block to line up to see the art. And I don't think it was just this last farewell. It was also a sign of, what the population was thinking. And the German art exhibition, that was supposed to be an exhibition where art would be sold. And in the end, Hitler ended up buying most of it so that it would be sold, so that it would be a success, which, yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
We'll take one more question.
Well, I just wanted to add something about that Entartet Kunst show, about all the art that was selected for that show. I mean, that was all as you did, Rachel, that you explained, and it was all the modern art that everyone was beginning to to collect, everything from Kandinsky to Kirchner, and all things that we look at today as this wonderful 20th century modern art, but the figures of the body's figures were could be distorted. The colors they used were not naturalistic, and that kind of thing. So,
Right.
which is not what, of course, Hitler
Mm-hmm.
wanted in the Aryan body that he was trying to depict. If anyone is interested in more about this Antarctican show, there was an exhibition held in the 1990s that recreated it. And I think it was started by the Los Angeles County Museum. And there is a big catalog that you can find in the library. And it's got photographs of the black and white photographs of the exhibition and a lot more information if anyone is interested. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fascinating. This was informative. This was appropriate and timely as well. So we really appreciate your being able to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
It's a
you,
pleasure.
Rachel. Thank you to everyone tuning in who joined us here at the KHC. Please check out our website and sign up for our mailing list. We'll be announcing a temporary exhibition that'll be up starting in January on the Kindred Transport, which is on loan from the Holocaust Museum of Los Angeles, and all our spring programs as well. We hope you all stay safe and be well. Thanks.